call came on a Tuesday, right when I had my hands wrist-deep in a Ski-Doo MXZ that some weekend warrior had managed to seize by running it bone dry on oil. I remember the exact moment because I was thinking about how people treat machines like they're disposable, like the laws of physics don't apply to their particular sled, and then my phone buzzed against the workbench, and everything after that moment divided my life into before and after. Dell was dead. Heart attack, they said. Went quick, they said, like that was supposed to be comforting. My Uncle Dell, the man who'd taught me how to true a wheel and read the weather and field dress a deer, was gone. He'd been winterizing his cabin up near Butternut Lake, doing the same thing he'd done every October for 43 years, and his heart just decided it was done. Ernie from the bait shop in town had found him. They had a standing chess game every Thursday, and when Dell didn't show, Ernie drove out to check, found him sitting in his chair by the window facing the tree line, like he'd been keeping watch over something in the dark. I'm Owen Frostborn. I was 34 years old that October, divorced for 3 years, no kids, running a small engine repair shop on the south side of Wausau. The shop was nothing fancy. A corrugated metal building with 2 bay doors, a parts counter I'd built myself, and a waiting area with coffee that tasted like motor oil no matter how many times I cleaned the pot. I fixed snowmobiles, ATVs, chainsaws, lawn tractors, anything, with a small engine that people in central Wisconsin depended on. It was honest work, predictable. I liked that about it. After my parents died, car accident, black ice, I was 11. Dell took me in without hesitation. He was my mother's brother, a bachelor who'd never wanted kids, and suddenly he had one. He never complained, not once, just cleared out his spare bedroom, enrolled me in school, and started teaching me everything he knew, which was a lot as it turned out. The man could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded and navigate 30 miles of unmarked forest without a compass. He wasn't affectionate in the traditional sense, no hugs, no I love yous, but he showed up. Every single day he showed up. The funeral was small. A few guys from the VFW hall where Dell played cards on Thursdays. Some neighbors from his street in Wausau. My ex-wife Sarah didn't come, which was probably for the best. I stood at the graveside in a suit that didn't fit right anymore and tried to remember the last thing I'd said to him. It had been something about the Packers, I think. Something meaningless. His lawyer called me 2 days later. Dell had left me the cabin. I'd spent summers there as a kid, weekends during hunting season as an adult. 40 acres of mixed hardwood and pine about an hour north of Wausau, butting up against state forest land. The cabin itself was nothing special. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with appliances from the Reagan administration. But it sat on a ridge overlooking a beaver pond that fed into Butternut Lake. And in the mornings, the mist would rise off that water like something from a dream. Dell had bought the place in 1978 for $12,000. It was worth considerably more now, not that I cared. I decided to take a week off to winterize the place. That's what I told myself anyway. Really, I think I needed to be somewhere that still smelled like him, still held the shape of his life. My shop could survive without me for a week. Marcus, my buddy who ran a garage across town, said he'd handle any emergencies. "You sure you want to go up there alone?" he'd asked, leaning against my workbench with a styrofoam cup of gas station coffee. Marcus was built like a fire hydrant, all chest and no neck, with grease permanently embedded in the creases of his knuckles. We'd known each other since high school. "I could come up for a few days, help you out." "I appreciate it, but I think I need some time." To do what? Stare at trees and feel sorry for yourself? That was Marcus. Emotional intelligence of a lug nut. But he meant well. Something like that, I said. I packed my truck that Friday morning, tools, groceries, winter clothes, enough firewood to supplement whatever Dell had stacked. The last thing I loaded was Diesel, Dell's old hound mix. He was maybe 10 years old, more gray in his muzzle than brown now, with droopy eyes that always looked a little sad. The dog had been staying with me since Dell passed, and I figured he deserved to see the cabin one last time, too. Diesel hopped into the passenger seat like he'd done it 1,000 times, which he probably had with Dell. He pressed his nose against the window as we pulled out of my apartment complex, and I swear his tail wagged when we turned north onto Highway 51. "Yeah, buddy," I said, reaching over to scratch his ears. "We're going home." The drive took about an hour and 15 minutes, the last 20 on progressively worse roads. Pavement gave way to gravel, gravel gave way to rutted dirt, and finally I was bumping down the 2-track that led to Dell's property. The trees pressed close on both sides, their branches already bare, reaching toward each other like skeletal fingers trying to touch. I'd always loved this drive in autumn, the way the light filtered golden through the remaining leaves, the smell of decay and cold earth that meant winter was coming. The cabin looked the same as it always had. Single-story cedar siding weathered to gray-green metal roof with a fieldstone chimney. Dell's old Chevy was parked under the lean-to beside the propane tank, and seeing it there, waiting for him to come back, made my throat tighten. I sat in my truck for a long moment, engine idling, just looking at the place. Diesel whined. "Okay," I said. "Okay, let's go." The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet I remembered from childhood visits, but something heavier. The bird feeders Dell kept, 4 of them hanging from shepherd's hooks around the clearing, were full. Sunflower seeds, thistle, sweat cake, all untouched. In October, those feeders should have been swarming with chickadees, nuthatches, juncos fattening up for winter. Instead, nothing. Not a single bird. I stood on the porch and listened. No bird song. No squirrel chatter. Just the wind moving through empty branches and the distant, almost subsonic hum of the forest settling into winter dormancy. That wasn't right. I'd spent enough time in these woods to know their rhythms, and this wasn't one of them. Diesel wouldn't get out of the truck. I walked back and opened the passenger door, expecting him to bound out the way he always had, nose to the ground, tail wagging as he investigated every interesting smell. Instead, he pressed himself against the far side of the cab, hackles raised, staring at the tree line behind the cabin. "Come on, boy, let's go inside." He whined, a high, thin sound I'd never heard him make before. "Diesel, come." Nothing. The dog was trembling now, his whole body shaking like he was standing in a snowbank instead of a truck cab. His eyes never left the trees. I looked where he was looking, just woods, maple, oak, white pine, the usual Wisconsin mix. Nothing moving, nothing there. "There's nothing, buddy, see? Nothing there." But Diesel wouldn't move. In the end, I had to physically pick him up, 60 pounds of resistant hound, and carry him to the cabin. He squirmed the whole way, trying to keep his eyes on that tree line. And the moment I set him down inside, he scrambled under the kitchen table and wouldn't come out. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to convince myself everything was normal. The birds were probably avoiding the feeders because of a hawk I hadn't seen. Diesel was old and disoriented, grieving Dell in his own dog way. The silence was just October in Wisconsin, the forest shutting down for winter. Reasonable explanations. rational explanations. I believed them right up until I checked the deer stand. Dell had built it himself 30 years ago, a wooden platform 12 feet up a sturdy oak about 200 yards behind the cabin. I walked out there in the fading light to make sure it was still structurally sound, planning to maybe sit it during bow season if I could get time off. The trail was overgrown with late-season ferns and fallen leaves, but I could still see the path we'd worn over decades of hunting trips. What I couldn't explain were the deer tracks. They came from the northeast, a clear trail of hoofprints pressed into the soft earth. A doe and 2 yearlings, judging by the size and spacing. The tracks led directly toward the deer stand, clear as a map, and then nothing. I crouched down, studying the ground. The tracks just stopped. Not wandered off, not scattered by a predator. Stopped. Like the deer had walked up to this spot and then simply ceased to exist. No drag marks, no blood, no sign of struggle. The last set of prints was pressed deep into the mud, weight forward, the deer's momentum clearly carrying it toward the stand, and then empty earth. I stood there for a long time, staring at those tracks, trying to make them make sense. A cougar, maybe? Cougars were being spotted in Wisconsin again after years of absence, supposedly migrants from the Black Hills. But a cougar attack would leave evidence. Blood, fur, claw marks, something. This was too clean. This was wrong. The light was failing fast, the way it does in October. The sun dropping behind the trees like a stone. I realized I'd been standing there longer than I thought, and the shadows had grown long and strange around me. The silence pressed against my ears. I walked back to the cabin faster than I'd walked out. Diesel was still under the kitchen table. I made dinner, canned chili, nothing fancy, and tried to coax him out with scraps. He wouldn't take them. Just lay there with his head on his paws, eyes fixed on the window that faced the backyard, the one that looked out toward that impossible ending of tracks. That night I couldn't sleep. The cabin had always been peaceful, the kind of quiet that city people pay money to experience. But now that quiet felt wrong, felt heavy, felt like something holding its breath. I lay in Dell's old bed, my bed now, I supposed, and stared at the ceiling and listened to nothing. Around 2 a.m, Diesel started to growl. It wasn't loud, just a low, continuous rumble from deep in his chest, the kind of sound a dog makes when it senses something it doesn't understand. I got up and found him still under the kitchen table, still staring at that window, his growl never wavering. I looked out the window. Darkness, trees, nothing. Easy, boy, there's nothing there. But I didn't believe myself anymore. The next morning I called the DNR. The ranger who answered sounded bored before I even finished my first sentence. Bird die-off, you think? Whereabouts? Not a die-off exactly, just no birds at all, and some strange animal behavior. Deer tracks that just stop. A long pause. Stop. Like the deer vanished. No blood, no signs of predation, just gone. Uh-huh. I could hear him typing something, probably checking email while I talked. Sir, this time of year we get a lot of unusual predator activity. Bears bulking up for hibernation. Maybe a cougar if you're far enough north. Animals behave differently when there's a big predator in the area. The tracks didn't show any. I can send someone out next week to take a look if you want to file a formal report. Otherwise, my advice? Keep your dog close, don't leave food out, and you'll probably be fine. These things usually sort themselves out. I thanked him and hung up, feeling foolish. Of course that's what it was. A bear. A cougar. Something large enough to frighten the birds away, to make deer disappear, to put a dog on edge. Something normal. I called Marcus to tell him I'd be staying the full week. "You sound weird," he said. "You okay up there?" "Fine, just tired, bad sleep." "I told you, man. Being alone too much, it does things to your head. You should come back, grab a beer, stop thinking so much." "I've got work to do. Dell left the place kind of half ready." "Your uncle was the most prepared man I ever met. That cabin's probably more ready for winter than my house is." He wasn't wrong. Dell had been meticulous, which made what I found that afternoon even harder to explain. I'd decided to set up the trail camera. It was a nice one, a stealth cam I'd bought for Dell 2 Christmases ago, capable of night vision and motion-activated recording. If something was prowling around the property, I wanted to know what it was. I hiked out to the northeast corner of Dell's 40 acres, where the land butted up against state forest, and strapped the camera to a pine tree facing a game trail. The next morning I went to check it. The camera was gone. At first I thought someone had stolen it. Though who would be out here, and why would they bother? Then I looked up. The camera was 40 feet up the pine tree. I stood there with my neck craned back, staring at it. The housing was cracked, like something had squeezed it. The strap was still intact, somehow wrapped around a branch that no human could reach without climbing gear. And even then, how would you get it up there without leaving marks on the bark? There were no ladder impressions, no boot scuffs, no broken branches from someone climbing. The camera had been placed up there as cleanly as if it had grown from the tree itself. The memory card was missing. I told myself it was kids, teenagers from town maybe, playing a prank on the city guy who'd inherited old Dell's place. But I knew the nearest neighbor was 6 miles away, and the nearest town with teenagers was 20. I told myself it was birds. Ravens, maybe, attracted to the shiny housing. But ravens don't crack polycarbonate. Ravens don't climb 40 feet straight up. I didn't tell myself the truth, not yet. I wasn't ready for the truth. That night, Diesel refused to go outside to relieve himself. I tried everything, treats, commands, even picking him up and carrying him to the door. But the moment I cracked it open, he scrambled out of my arms and retreated to his spot under the kitchen table, leaving scratches on my forearms where his claws dug in. His hackles were up, had been up all day. The fur along his spine stood in a rigid line, and his eyes never left the windows. "What do you see, boy?" I asked him. "What's out there?" But he just whined and pressed himself lower against the floor, and outside the windows there was nothing but darkness, nothing but trees, nothing but the silence of a forest that had forgotten how to make sound. I sat with my back against the wall and my deer rifle across my knees and watched the windows until dawn. Dawn came slow and gray, filtering through the windows like something reluctant to arrive. I watched the light strengthen by degrees, my back stiff from the wall, my hands cramped around the rifle I'd held all night. Diesel had finally stopped growling around 4 in the morning, but he hadn't moved from under the table, hadn't closed his eyes. We'd kept vigil together, the old dog and me, watching for something neither of us could name. When the light was strong enough to show color, the brown of the kitchen cabinets, the faded blue of Dell's curtains, I finally let myself breathe. Whatever had been out there, whatever had put that wrongness in the air, it seemed to retreat with the darkness. The silence that had pressed against the cabin all night began to ease, replaced by something almost normal. Almost. I made coffee, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The percolator Dell had used for 40 years chugged and sputtered on the propane stove, filling the kitchen with a smell so familiar it made my chest ache. This was supposed to be a week of grieving, of remembering. Instead, I'd spent my first 2 nights jumping at shadows. "Okay," I said out loud, the words strange in the silence. "Okay, let's figure this out." Diesel's ears perked at my voice, but he didn't move from under the table. I needed evidence. I needed to prove to myself that whatever was happening had a rational explanation. A bear, a cougar, maybe even a wolf pack pushing down from the Upper Peninsula. Wisconsin's ecosystem was changing. Animals were appearing in places they hadn't been seen in decades. That was documented. That was real. Whatever I was imagining, whatever was making my lizard brain scream danger every time the sun went down, it had to have a normal explanation. I waited until the sun was fully up, until the light was strong and golden and the shadows had retreated to where shadows belonged. Then I put on my boots, grabbed my rifle, and went outside to look for evidence. The frost had come overnight, coating everything in a thin white shell that crunched under my feet. Good tracking conditions, I told myself. If something had been circling the cabin, it would have left prints in the frost, disturbances in the grass. I'd find tracks, identify the animal, and feel like an idiot for sitting up all night with a gun. I started with the perimeter of the clearing. The grass around the cabin was undisturbed. No tracks, no bent stems, no sign that anything had walked there since the frost settled. I expanded my search in wider circles, checking the tree line, the area around the propane tank, the path down to the beaver pond. Nothing. Not a single print that wasn't mine. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made my skin crawl. I'd heard something last night. Diesel had heard something. The dog had growled for hours, hackles raised, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. But there was no evidence, no proof, like whatever had been out there had left no trace of its passing. I walked to where the trail camera had been, the one I'd found 40 feet up a pine tree. In daylight, the sight was even more disturbing. The camera hung there, cracked housing glinting in the morning sun, strap wound impossibly around a branch no human could reach. I stood at the base of the tree and studied the bark again, looking for something I'd missed. Climbing spikes would leave marks. A ladder would leave impressions in the soil. A climbing rope would require a lower anchor point. There was nothing. The tree was untouched except for that camera, 40 feet up, placed there by something that didn't need ladders or ropes. I found myself thinking about bears again. Black bears could climb trees, everyone knew that. But a bear climbing a tree would leave claw marks, deep gouges in the bark. And a bear wouldn't take a camera, wouldn't remove the memory card, wouldn't place the housing on a branch like a trophy. Bears didn't do that. Bears didn't think that way. What did think that way? I pushed the question aside and kept searching. The deer tracks I'd found the day before were still there, though the frost had softened their edges. I followed them again, starting from the northeast, tracing the doe and her yearlings as they moved toward the deer stand. The tracks were clear, undeniable proof that something had walked this path recently. And then, nothing. I crouched at the place where the tracks ended, studying the ground. The last hoof print was sharp-edged despite the frost, pressed deep into soil that was just starting to freeze for winter. The deer had been moving with purpose, not fleeing. The stride length was consistent, unhurried, and then it simply stopped. I looked up. The deer stand was about 30 feet away, the wooden platform visible through the bare branches. Dell's stand, where I'd sat with him every November since I was 12 years old, where he'd taught me patience and stillness and the art of waiting for the right moment. Something cold settled in my stomach. The ladder to the stand was intact. The platform looked untouched. But there, on the supporting oak, I saw something I'd missed before. Claw marks. Not bear claws. I knew what those looked like, had seen them on trees all over Wisconsin. These were different. Longer, deeper, running in parallel grooves from about 4 feet off the ground all the way up to the platform. Like something had climbed the tree, using claws the length of my fingers, digging into the bark hard enough to leave furrows a 1/4 inch deep. I reached out and touched one of the marks. The wood beneath was pale and fresh, the sap still slightly sticky. These weren't old. These had been made recently within the last day or two. My hand was shaking when I pulled it back. I photographed everything with my phone. The claw marks, the deer tracks, the camera in the tree. I told myself I was documenting evidence, building a case for the DNR, but really I was trying to make it real, trying to capture proof that I wasn't imagining this, wasn't losing my mind in my uncle's empty cabin. When I got back to the cabin, I called Marcus. "Hey, you sound better," he said when he answered. "Get some sleep?" "Marcus, I need to ask you something. You ever hear stories about anything strange up in the Butternut Lake area? Anything about weird animals, attacks, anything like that?" A pause. "What kind of weird animals?" "I don't know. Big ones. Something that could climb trees, take down deer. Something that—" I stopped, hearing how I sounded. "Forget it. Never mind." "Owen, man, are you okay? You sound—" "I'm fine. I found some strange tracks, that's all. Probably a bear." "Bears don't take down deer. You know that. Now cougars, on the other hand." "It's not a cougar." "How do you know?" I didn't answer. I didn't know how to explain the wrongness of those claw marks, the impossibility of the camera, the way Diesel wouldn't stop staring at the windows even now in full daylight. How do you tell your best friend that something is circling your cabin at night? Something that leaves no tracks? Something that your dog can sense but you can't see? "Look," Marcus said into the silence. "You've been through a lot. Dell dying, the divorce, working too hard for too long. Maybe being alone up there isn't the best thing right now. Why don't you come back, let me buy you a beer, and you can go back up there in a few weeks when you've had some rest." "I can't leave, there's still work to do." "What work?" "Dell kept that place running like a Swiss watch. You said so yourself. The winterization can wait. It's October, Owen. You've got weeks before you need to worry about pipes freezing." He was right. I knew he was right, but something in me refused to leave, refused to admit that I was scared of shadows and silence and a dog that wouldn't go outside. I was Owen Frostborn, small engine repair, practical man, Dell's nephew. I didn't run from things I couldn't explain. I figured them out. "I'll call you if I need anything," I said, and hung up before he could argue. That afternoon I drove into town. Butternut Lake wasn't really a town, more like a wide spot in the road with a gas station, a bait shop, and a bar called Lundgren's that had been serving the same fish fry since 1962. I filled up my truck and went into the bait shop, where a guy named Ernie sold licenses and told lies about the size of the muskies he'd caught. Ernie was in his 70s, had lived in this area his whole life. If anyone knew about strange things in these woods, it would be him. "Hey, Ernie, I'm Owen Frostborn, Dell's nephew." "I know who you are, son. Saw you at the funeral. Sorry about Dell. He was good people." "Thanks. Listen, I'm staying at the cabin for a few days, and I've been noticing some strange stuff. Animal activity that doesn't make sense. You ever hear of anything weird up in those woods?" Ernie's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A wariness I hadn't seen before. "What kind of strange stuff?" I told him about the birds, the deer tracks, the camera. I didn't tell him about Diesel, about the way the silence felt wrong, about the night I'd spent with a rifle across my knees. Some things you don't say out loud, not to a man you barely know. Ernie listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Could be a bear," he said finally. "We've got some big ones around here. One got into Hanson's chicken coop last spring, made a hell of a mess. A bear wouldn't take a camera and put it 40 feet up a tree." "No," Ernie agreed. "No, I suppose it wouldn't." He looked at me for a long moment, and I had the feeling he wanted to say something else. But then another customer came in, some guy looking for ice fishing equipment, even though the lakes wouldn't freeze for another month, and the moment passed. "You take care of yourself up there," Ernie said as I left, "and don't stay out after dark if you can help it." I wanted to ask him why. I wanted to demand to know what he wasn't telling me. But the other customer was asking about tip-ups and ice augers, and Ernie had already turned away. I drove back to the cabin with the feeling that I was missing something important, some piece of the puzzle that everyone else could see. That night, I saw them for the first time. The eyes. I'd gone outside to my truck around dusk, planning to grab the cooler I'd left in the bed with the rest of my groceries. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I'd been in any state to appreciate beauty. Diesel had refused to come with me, had actually backed away from the door when I opened it, retreating to his spot under the kitchen table with a whine that sounded almost like a warning. I should have listened to the dog. The cooler was heavier than I remembered, and I had to set it on the tailgate to get a better grip. That's when I looked up toward the cedar thicket at the edge of the clearing and saw the light reflecting back at me. 2 points of amber gold about 7 feet off the ground, catching the last rays of the setting sun, or maybe my truck's headlights. I couldn't remember if I'd left them on. They didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. My first thought was bear. Black bears in Wisconsin stood about 5 feet at the shoulder when they were on all fours, maybe 6 feet if they reared up. But 7 feet? That was big even for a large male. My second thought was that I should be able to see more of it. There was still enough light to make out shapes, still enough contrast between the trees and the sky. If something that big was standing in the cedar thicket, I should be able to see its body, its outline, something. But all I could see were those eyes, hanging in the darkness like twin lanterns, watching me with an intensity that made my spine feel like ice. I stood frozen, the cooler forgotten, my hands gripping the tailgate hard enough to hurt. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to move, to get back inside, to do anything except stand there like a deer in headlights. But my legs wouldn't work. My body had locked up in a way I'd never experienced before, every muscle rigid, every nerve firing with a single message. Don't move, don't breathe, don't attract attention. Those eyes didn't waver. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like hours, but it was probably only seconds, maybe a minute at most. The light was failing fast, the way it does in October, and those amber points were getting harder to see against the darkening woods. But they never disappeared, never moved. And then they did. They rose. Not like an animal standing up, too smooth for that, too controlled. They rose like someone taking a single step upward, like something ascending a staircase made of air, higher and higher, until they were 8 feet off the ground, maybe 9, still staring at me with that unblinking intensity. I ran. I don't remember grabbing the cooler, but I had it in my hands when I crashed through the cabin door. I don't remember closing the door either, but I must have, because when I finally stopped moving, I was standing in the kitchen with my back against the wall, gasping like I'd run a marathon, and the door was shut and the deadbolt was thrown. Diesel was whining under the table, a continuous high-pitched sound that matched the frequency of my own terror. "It's okay," I told myself. "It's okay." It was just a bear, a big bear, standing on something, a stump or a rock but there were no stumps in that cedar thicket. I knew those woods. Dell had taught me every inch of that property, and there was nothing in that thicket that would put a bear's eyes at 7 feet, let alone 9. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat in the same spot, rifle across my knees, watching the windows until my eyes burned. Several times I thought I saw movement at the edge of the clearing, a shadow that was darker than the other shadows, a shape that might have been moving between the trees. But every time I looked directly at it, there was nothing there, just trees and darkness and my own imagination running wild. The eyes didn't come back. At least I didn't see them again. But Diesel growled all night, a constant rumble that vibrated through the floor, and I knew in my gut that something was out there, watching and waiting. Around 3 a.m, I heard something else. Footsteps. Not the padding of animal paws or the random crunch of a deer moving through leaves. These were deliberate, measured, 2-footed. They circled the cabin slowly, crunching the frost-covered grass, pausing at each window for what felt like an eternity before moving on. I tracked their progress by sound alone, around the kitchen, past the bathroom, pausing longest at the bedroom window that faced the beaver pond. My finger was on the trigger of my rifle. My breathing was so shallow, I wasn't sure I was getting any air at all. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to look, to see what was out there, but I couldn't make myself move, couldn't make myself turn my head toward the window where the footsteps had stopped. And then, soft as a whisper, I heard breathing. Not my breathing, not Diesel's. Something else, right outside the window, separated from me by nothing but a 1/4 inch of glass. Deep, slow breaths, like a bellows working. And underneath that sound, something else. A low rumble that might have been a growl, might have been a purr, might have been something I had no name for. I don't know how long it lasted. Hours, minutes, an eternity compressed into a single moment of perfect terror. But eventually, the breathing stopped. The footsteps moved away, not retreating exactly, but withdrawing, choosing to leave. When dawn came, I found the frost outside the bedroom window disturbed in a rough circle, like something large had stood there for a long time. But there were no footprints, no tracks of any kind. Just the mark of something's presence, and then nothing. That morning I made a decision. I was going to find out what this thing was, even if it killed me. The not knowing was worse than any truth could be. I'd spent 2 nights jumping at shadows, 2 nights with a rifle I was afraid to use, 2 nights watching a dog cower under a table like he was waiting for the end of the world. I couldn't keep doing this. I needed answers. I drove back into town and stopped at Lundgren's bar, figuring the afternoon crowd might have more stories than Ernie had been willing to share. The place was mostly empty. A couple of old-timers nursing beers at the bar, a young guy playing pool by himself in the back. The bartender was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and the kind of weathered face that said she'd lived a hard life and come out the other side. "What can I get you?" "Whatever's on tap, and some information if you've got it." She poured me a beer without comment, then leaned against the bar with her arms crossed. "You're Dell Frostborn's nephew, the one staying up at his cabin?" Word traveled fast in small towns. "That's right. I've been seeing some strange things up there. Hearing things. I was wondering if anyone around here had ever—" "Marge, don't," one of the old-timers said. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not unfriendly, exactly, but guarded, protective. "The boy's been through enough, losing Dell. He doesn't need to hear stories." "What stories?" I asked, turning to face him. "Please. Something's happening at that cabin, and I need to understand what it is." The old-timer exchanged a look with his friend, then sighed. "There's nothing to understand, son. Sometimes the woods are strange, that's all. Animals do things that don't make sense. People see things that aren't there. It's been that way forever." "I'm not imagining this." "I didn't say you were." He took a long drink of his beer, staring straight ahead. "Just that some things are better left alone. You want my advice? Go back to Wausau. Sell the cabin. Don't come up here anymore. That cabin is all I have left of my uncle." Something flickered in his eyes. Sympathy, maybe, or understanding. "Then winterize it fast and get out before the snow comes. And whatever you do—" He paused like he was weighing his next words carefully. "Don't stay out after dark. Don't answer if something calls your name. And if you see anything that doesn't make sense, don't look at it. Don't acknowledge it. Just go inside and wait for morning." "Why?" But he just shook his head and turned back to his beer, and I knew I wouldn't get anything more out of him. I drove back to the cabin in the last light of day, my mind churning with questions that had no answers. What had those old men seen? What did they know that they wouldn't tell me? And why did everyone's advice boil down to the same thing? Don't stay, don't look, don't engage. It was nearly dusk when I turned onto the 2-track that led to Dell's property. The trees pressed close on both sides, their bare branches reaching toward each other overhead, forming a tunnel of gray and brown that seemed to go on forever. The light was fading fast, painting everything in shades of purple and black. I almost didn't see it. A shape, crossing the road maybe 50 yards ahead of me. I caught it in my peripheral vision first. Movement where there shouldn't be any. Something large, breaking the line of the trees. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding on loose gravel, and stared through the windshield at the thing that had stopped in the middle of the road. It was standing on 2 legs. That was the first thing I processed. The thing that made my brain stutter and skip like a record hitting a scratch. 2 legs, not 4. Upright, like a man. But the proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were too broad, nearly twice as wide as any human's. The arms hung too low, the hands reaching almost to the knees. And the legs bent backward at the ankle like a dog's, like a wolf's. The silhouette unmistakable against the dying light. It wasn't moving, just standing there, facing my truck, its outline black against the purple sky. I couldn't see its face, couldn't make out any details except that terrible shape, that wrong configuration of limbs and joints that my brain refused to accept as possible. I sat frozen in my truck, foot on the brake, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The engine was still running, the headlights cutting twin beams through the gathering dusk, but they didn't reach far enough to illuminate the thing on the road. It remained a silhouette, a shadow given form, something that shouldn't exist, standing exactly where I needed to go. And then it moved. Not toward me, that was the only mercy. It turned slowly, deliberately, giving me a full view of its profile. The head was wrong too, I realized. Too long, too narrow, jutting forward from the massive shoulders in a way that suggested a snout rather than a face. Ears pricked up at the top of the skull, pointed and alert. It looked at me. I couldn't see its eyes from this distance, couldn't make out any features at all, but I knew it was looking at me. Knew it with a certainty that went beyond sight, beyond logic, straight into the part of my brain that remembered what it meant to be prey. And then it walked into the trees, not ran, not fled, walked with a casual, unhurried gait that said it had nothing to fear from me or my truck or anything else in this forest. Its legs moved wrong, a loping, almost graceful stride that covered ground faster than it should have, disappearing into the shadows between the pines in seconds. I sat there for a long time after it was gone, staring at the place where it had crossed the road. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't have driven if I'd wanted to. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat, my temples, the tips of my fingers. Every breath I took sounded too loud in the silence of the cab. That wasn't a bear. The thought came unbidden, undeniable. I'd seen bears. I'd seen cougars, wolves, every predator these woods had to offer. None of them moved like that. None of them stood like that. None of them had that shape, that impossible configuration of human and animal that my brain kept rejecting, even as my eyes insisted it was real. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for the light to fail completely, long enough for darkness to swallow the road ahead and the trees on either side, long enough for the cold to start seeping through the truck's heater, making me shiver in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Finally, I made myself drive. The rest of the trip to the cabin was a blur. I remember gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I remember checking my mirrors every few seconds, watching for movement in the darkness behind me. I remember the moment the cabin came into view, its windows dark, its familiar shape somehow strange and alien in the headlights' glow. I pulled up as close to the door as I could get and left the engine running while I sprinted inside. Diesel was where I'd left him, under the table, and when I slammed the door shut behind me, he didn't even lift his head. He just lay there, looking at me with eyes that held a terrible understanding. "I know, buddy," I said, my voice cracking. "I know. That night I did something I hadn't done since I was 11 years old, since the night my parents died and Dell came to take me home. I prayed. I knelt beside Dell's bed, my bed now, the bed I couldn't bring myself to sleep in, and I pressed my hands together, and I asked God, or whatever was listening, to please let me survive until morning, to please keep that thing, whatever it was, outside the walls, to please let me wake up and find that this had all been a dream, a stress-induced hallucination, anything except what I knew in my heart it really was. Nothing answered. I sat against the wall with my rifle across my knees, and watched the windows and waited for something to happen. The silence pressed against the cabin like a physical weight, broken only by Diesel's soft whines and my own ragged breathing. Hours passed. The moon rose, visible through the kitchen window, painting everything in shades of silver and black, and through it all I kept seeing that silhouette in my mind. Those impossible proportions, that wrong shape moving through the dusk, like it owned every shadow in the forest. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, tried to convince myself that the stress and the grief and the sleepless nights had finally caught up with me, that I was seeing things that weren't there. But I knew better. I'd felt the weight of those eyes on me, first in the cedar thicket, now on the road. I'd heard the footsteps circling the cabin, the breathing outside my window. Something was out there, something that didn't belong in any field guide, any nature documentary, any rational explanation I could construct. Something that moved like a predator and watched like an intelligence and walked on two legs through woods that should have been empty of anything larger than a deer. And it knew where I was. I didn't sleep that night either. Didn't even try. I just sat there, rifle ready, watching the windows, waiting for dawn, waiting for the thing to come back. Dawn came slowly, grudgingly, like even the sun was reluctant to look at what these woods had become. I watched the gray light seep through the windows and felt something loosen in my chest, some tension I hadn't realized I'd been holding for hours. The rifle was still across my knees, my fingers cramped around the stock. And when I finally made myself let go, my hands shook so badly I couldn't hold them still. Diesel lifted his head when I stood, watching me with those knowing eyes. He hadn't moved from under the table all night, hadn't made a sound after that first hour of soft whining. I understood. I hadn't made much sound either, beyond my own breathing and the occasional creak of joints when I shifted position against the wall. "We made it, buddy," I said, and my voice came out rough, scraped raw. "We made it through another night." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't a victory, it was a reprieve. Whatever was out there hadn't come for me last night, but that didn't mean it wouldn't come tonight, or the next night, or every night until I left these woods for good. I should have left right then. Should have loaded Diesel into the truck and driven south until the trees gave way to farmland, until the farmland gave way to suburbs, until I was surrounded by concrete and street lights and the comforting drone of human noise. But I didn't. Part of it was stubbornness, that frostborn hard-headedness the Dell used to joke would be the death of me. Part of it was denial. That desperate human need to believe there was a rational explanation for everything, that the world made sense even when every instinct screamed otherwise. But mostly, I think, it was Dell. This cabin was the last piece of him I had left. His tools were still in the shed, his coffee mug still on the kitchen counter, his books still stacked on the nightstand beside the bed I couldn't bring myself to sleep in. If I ran now, I'd be abandoning all of it, abandoning him. So I stayed. God help me, I stayed. The morning passed in a haze of exhaustion and fear. I made coffee, with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Burned my tongue because I was too impatient to let it cool, too desperate for the warmth and the caffeine and the normalcy of the routine. Diesel finally emerged from under the table around 9, padding to the door and whining softly. I let him out into the pale October sunshine and watched him from the doorway, rifle in hand, while he did his business on the edge of the clearing. He wouldn't go near the tree line, wouldn't even look at it, He kept his back to the woods the entire time, his hackles raised, his body rigid with tension. When he finished, he bolted back to the cabin so fast his legs nearly went out from under him on the frost-slicked grass. I couldn't blame him. I didn't want to look at the tree line either. But I made myself look, made myself study the cedars and the pines and the shadows between them, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of what had crossed the road in front of me the night before. There was nothing, just trees and silence and the distant call of a crow, the first bird I'd heard since I arrived. The crow fell silent after a few seconds. The silence swallowed its call like a stone, dropping into deep water. I spent the morning doing small tasks around the cabin, trying to keep my hands busy, trying to keep my mind from circling back to that silhouette. I checked the generator, topped off the fuel, made sure the batteries were charged. I inventoried the food in the pantry, calculated how long I could survive if I was trapped here. If the roads became impassable, if something happened and I couldn't leave. It was that last thought that made me stop, made me stand in the middle of the kitchen with a can of beans in my hand and really think about what I was doing. I was preparing for a siege. I was treating this cabin like a fortress, like a last stand, like the only barrier between me and something that wanted me dead. What the hell was I still doing here? I put the beans down and walked to the window, looking out at the clearing, at the truck, at the dirt road that led back to Highway 13 and civilization. 23 miles. That's all it was. 23 miles of gravel and logging roads, and then I'd be on pavement, surrounded by other cars, other people, other lives that had no idea what lurked in these woods. I could leave right now, pack up the truck, load diesel, drive away, and never look back. Hire someone to clean out the cabin, sell the property sight unseen. Let this place become someone else's problem. But even as I thought it, I knew I wouldn't do it. Not yet. Not without proof. Because here's the thing about being a mechanic, about spending 30 years of your life diagnosing problems and finding solutions. You learn to trust evidence over instinct. You learn that the weird noise isn't always what it sounds like, that the obvious answer isn't always the right one, that you have to look closer, dig deeper, understand the problem before you can fix it. I needed to understand what was happening here. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind, that the grief and the stress and the sleepless nights hadn't finally broken something inside me. I needed to see it again, in daylight this time, when I could trust my eyes and my judgment and the solid weight of the rifle in my hands. That was my reasoning anyway. That was what I told myself as I pulled on my jacket and checked the ammunition in my pockets and stepped out into the cold October morning. Later, I'd understand that I wasn't thinking clearly, that exhaustion and fear had compromised my judgment in ways I couldn't recognize at the time. But in that moment, standing on Dell's porch, with the sun on my face and the rifle in my hands, I felt almost brave. Diesel wouldn't come with me. I tried to coax him, tried to bribe him with treats, tried everything short of physically dragging him out the door. He just lay under the table and looked at me with those knowing eyes, and finally I gave up. Maybe it was better this way. If something happened, if I didn't come back, at least he'd be safe inside the cabin. Stay, I told him. And he didn't need to be told twice. The logging road was easier to navigate in daylight. I could see the ruts and the rocks, could pick my way around the worst of the mud, could keep my footing on the frost-licked patches of dead leaves. I walked slowly, rifle ready, scanning the trees on either side of the road for any sign of movement. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. The forest was as silent as it had been for days, that unnatural absence of birdsong and animal noise that I was starting to think of as normal. I hated that. Hated that my brain was already adapting to the wrongness, accepting it as just another feature of this place. I reached the spot where I'd seen the silhouette around noon. The sun was high and bright, filtering through the bare branches of the aspens, casting long shadows across the road. I stood there for a long time, studying the ground, looking for tracks. I found them. They were pressed into a patch of soft mud at the edge of the road, maybe 10 feet from where I'd stopped the truck the night before. At first glance, they looked almost like dog tracks, elongated, with 4 distinct toe pads and a larger heel pad behind. But they were wrong in ways that made my stomach clench. They were too big, easily twice the size of the largest wolf tracks I'd ever seen, each print nearly as long as my forearm. The toe pads were stretched, distended, almost finger-like in their arrangement. And the claws, God, the claws. They dug into the mud like trenching tools, leaving gouges that went down 2-3 inches deep. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the stride length. I paced it out, stepping carefully between the prints, counting my steps. The creature had been walking, not running, not loping, just walking, and each stride covered nearly 7 feet. 7 feet. That meant it was moving on legs that were impossibly long, legs that could cover ground faster than any human could run. And the prints were bipedal, 2 legs. It had been walking on 2 legs. I stood there in the middle of the logging road, staring at those tracks, feeling the last shreds of denial crumble away. This was real. This was happening. There was something in these woods that walked like a man and left tracks like a wolf, and stood 8 feet tall in the darkness. And I was standing in its territory alone, miles from help. I started walking back to the cabin, not running. I wasn't sure my legs could manage running at that point, but moving quickly, rifle up, every sense straining for any hint of movement in the trees around me. The woods were still silent, still empty, but now that silence felt different. It felt like the held breath before a scream. I was about halfway back when I saw the deer. It was hanging from a pine tree about 30 feet off the road, suspended by its back legs from a branch that had to be 20 feet off the ground. Its throat had been torn out, and the blood had frozen into long icicles that dripped from its chin, catching the sunlight like terrible jewelry. Its belly was split open, entrails dangling in loops and coils, and something had been eating. Something had been feeding on it recently enough that steam still rose from the exposed organs. I stopped. I couldn't help it. I just stopped and stared, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. No animal did this, no bear, no wolf, no cougar. Animals don't hang their prey from trees. Animals don't display their kills like trophies, like warnings, like messages left for anyone stupid enough to wander through. The deer's head turned. I don't mean it fell or swung or moved in the wind. I mean it turned, deliberately, the way a living thing turns to look at something that's caught its attention. Its eyes, glassy and dead and covered in frost, fixed on me, and its mouth opened, and a sound came out that wasn't a deer sound, that wasn't any sound an animal should make. It was a word, a single word, spoken in a voice like gravel and breaking bones. Run. I ran. I don't remember much of the next few minutes, Just trees and shadows and my own ragged breathing, just the crash of my boots through dead leaves and the hammering of my heart against my ribs. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Ran until the cabin appeared through the trees like a mirage. Ran until I was inside with the door slammed and bolted behind me. Diesel was barking. That was strange. He hadn't barked since we arrived. Had been too terrified to make any sound louder than a whimper. But now he was barking. Not at me, not at the door, but at the kitchen window. I turned. There was a face pressed against the glass. I saw it for less than a second, but that second stretched into forever, burning itself into my memory like a brand. A snout, elongated and lupine, covered in coarse gray-black fur matted with frost. Nostrils flaring, lips peeled back to reveal teeth. So many teeth, yellow-white and curved and longer than my fingers, and eyes, amber gold and bright with intelligence, watching me with an expression that looked almost like amusement. It was smiling. The thing was smiling at me. And then a hand came up, pressing against the glass beside the face. Not a paw. A hand, with 5 distinct fingers and an opposable thumb and claws that curved like sickles from each fingertip. It raised one of those claws and tapped the window. 3 times, tap, tap, tap. The sound was deliberate, patient, almost playful. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I screamed like a child. Like a man who's just watched the world crack open and let something impossible climb through. I screamed and raised the rifle and fired, punching a hole through the glass, through the space where that face had been. But it was already gone. Diesel was still barking, his voice raw and desperate. I grabbed him, pulled him close, pressed my back against the wall farthest from the windows. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the rifle. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples, my throat, my fingertips. I'd seen it. Up close, in daylight, with nothing between us but a pane of glass. I'd seen its face, its hands, its teeth. I'd seen the intelligence in its eyes, the cruel amusement in its smile. And I'd understood, in that moment, that whatever this thing was, it wasn't an animal. It wasn't operating on instinct or hunger or any motivation I could understand. It was playing with me. The rest of that afternoon is a blur of terror and waiting. I moved from window to window, rifle ready, watching the tree line for any sign of movement. The bullet hole in the kitchen window let in the cold, frost forming on the jagged edges of the glass. But I didn't dare try to cover it. I needed to see. I needed to know when it was coming. But it didn't come. As the hours passed and the sun sank toward the horizon, the woods remained still, remained silent, remained empty. I started to hope, stupidly, desperately, that maybe I'd scared it off. Maybe the gunshot had convinced it that I wasn't worth the trouble, that easier prey waited elsewhere. I should have known better. At dusk, I found the first sign. I'd been checking the windows obsessively, making circuits of the cabin every few minutes, when I noticed something on the back porch. A bundle wrapped in what looked like burlap, sitting on the top step like a delivery someone had left. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave it alone, to pretend I hadn't seen it, to barricade myself inside and wait for dawn. But I had to know, I had to understand. I opened the door just wide enough to reach out and grab the bundle, then slammed it shut and threw the bolt. The burlap was stiff with frost, crackling as I unwrapped it. Inside was the trail camera, the one I'd found 40 feet up a pine tree, the one with the cracked housing and the missing memory card. Something had retrieved it, had brought it here, had left it on my doorstep like a gift. The memory card was back in its slot. My hands shook as I pulled out my laptop, as I slotted the card into the reader, as I opened the folder of images. Part of me knew what I was going to see. Part of me had known since the moment I found the camera, since the moment I understood that whatever was out there was intelligent enough to remove evidence, to cover its tracks, to think. The images loaded. The first dozen were normal. Trees, shadows, a deer walking past at dusk. Then the motion sensor had triggered on something else. Something that filled the frame with darkness and fur and eyes that reflected the infrared flash like golden coins. It had known about the camera. Had known from the beginning. The next images were of the cabin, of me moving past windows, sitting on the porch, standing in the clearing with Diesel at my feet. There were dozens of them, taken over the course of days, documenting my every movement. It had been watching me the whole time I'd been here, trying to convince myself that I was alone, that I was safe, that the footsteps and the breathing were just my imagination. It had been watching. The last image on the card wasn't of me, it was a close-up, taken from maybe 6 inches away. A face filled the frame, that face, the wolf snout and the curved teeth and the intelligent eyes. But this time there was no window between us, no distance, no barrier. This time it was inside the cabin. The timestamp said 3:47 a.m. last night, while I'd been sitting against the wall with my rifle across my knees, staring at the windows, waiting for it to come. It had already been inside. There was no broken lock, no forced window, no sign of entry at all. It had gotten in through nothing, or through something I couldn't see, couldn't understand, couldn't defend against. It had stood over me while I kept my useless vigil, had taken this photo as a trophy, as a message, as proof that no lock and no wall and no weapon could keep it out. It could have killed me. It could have torn my throat out while I sat there thinking I was safe. But it hadn't. Because it wasn't ready yet. Because the game wasn't finished. I threw up. Couldn't help it. I made it to the bathroom just in time, retching, until my stomach was empty, until I was shaking and sweating and crying all at once. Diesel pressed against my legs, whimpering, and I held on to him like a drowning man holding on to driftwood. I had to leave. I had to leave right now. Tonight, immediately. I couldn't stay here another minute. Couldn't close my eyes, knowing that thing could get inside whenever it wanted. Couldn't pretend that walls and doors meant anything when it had already proven they didn't. I grabbed my keys, grabbed my phone, left everything else, the clothes, the tools, the memories of Dell, and ran for the truck. It was waiting for me. I saw it the moment I stepped outside, standing at the edge of the clearing where the trees began. It wasn't hiding this time, wasn't lurking in shadows or watching from concealment. It stood in the open, fully upright, and let me see it. 8 feet tall, maybe more, covered in dense gray fur that caught the last light of the dying sun. Its legs bent backward at the knee, digitigrade like a dog's, but ending in feet that were almost hand-like, with long curved claws digging into the frozen ground. Its arms hung past its knees, thick with muscle, hands open and relaxed, and its head was a wolf's skull stretched over a human's, somehow impossibly, a long muzzle filled with teeth, ears pricked forward, eyes fixed on me with an intelligence that was worse than any animal's because I could see it thinking, calculating, deciding. It smiled. That same smile I'd seen through the window, lips pulling back to reveal the curved yellow fangs. And then it spoke. Stay. The word came out wrong, gargled, like human speech, forced through a throat that wasn't designed for it. But it was a word, it was language, it was proof that this thing, whatever it was, wasn't just intelligent. It understood. It knew what I was. It knew what it was doing. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't work, my hands wouldn't work. Nothing worked. I just stood there on the porch, keys in my fist, staring at the impossible thing that had chosen me for its prey. It took a step forward, then another, moving slowly, deliberately, closing the distance between us with the patience of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to run. The truck was 30 feet away, might as well have been 30 miles. But I ran anyway. I don't know how I made it. Don't know how my legs found the strength to move, how my hand found the door handle, how I got inside and slammed the lock before those claws could reach me. The thing was fast, impossibly fast, but I was faster, just barely, just enough. I cranked the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I stomped the gas, spraying gravel, fishtailing on the frozen ground, aiming for the road and praying I'd reach it before the creature hit the side of the truck like a freight train. The impact threw me against the door, sent the truck spinning, nearly flipped us over. I heard metal screaming, glass cracking, and then we were moving again, bouncing over ruts, crashing through brush, heading for the road. I looked in the rearview mirror. It was following. Running on all fours now, low to the ground, covering distance faster than the truck could accelerate on the rough terrain. Its eyes caught my headlights and reflected them back, twin points of golden fire in the darkness. I hit the logging road and floored it. The truck lurched and bounced, threatening to shake itself apart, but I didn't care. I just drove, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, foot pressed to the floor, watching those eyes get closer and closer in the mirror. It caught me 3 miles from the highway. 1 second I was driving, the next the truck was airborne, spinning, the world outside the windows becoming a kaleidoscope of trees and sky and ground. We hit something, a tree, a boulder I never knew, and came to a stop so suddenly. My seatbelt nearly cut me in half. The engine was dead. The headlights were dead. Everything was dead except me, hanging sideways in my seat, blood running down my face from a cut on my forehead, staring through the cracked windshield at darkness. And then the darkness moved. I saw it climb onto the hood of the truck, felt the metal groan under its weight. I saw it crouch, lowering that wolf's head until its face was inches from the windshield, until its breath fogged the glass, until I could see every detail of its features in the faint light of the moon. It raised one hand, those terrible wrong hands, and pressed it against the windshield. Slowly, deliberately, it dragged a claw across the glass, leaving a trail of scratched frost behind. A shape, a word. Mine. I don't remember screaming, but I must have. I don't remember crying. But my face was wet with more than blood. I just remember sitting there, trapped, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but stare at that word scratched into the frost, while the creature watched me with those intelligent, hungry eyes. It settled onto the hood like a cat settling onto a warm spot. It made no move to break the glass, to tear open the door, to get at me. It just watched and waited. And I understood finally that I wasn't going to escape. Not tonight, not ever. This thing had chosen me, had been hunting me since the moment I arrived, and now it had me exactly where it wanted me. I was trapped in my uncle's truck, miles from help, alone with a monster. And all I could do was wait for whatever came next. The night became a siege. I don't know how long I sat there in those first minutes, paralyzed, watching the creature watch me through the cracked windshield. Time had lost all meaning. The world had shrunk to the cab of my uncle's truck. The smell of blood and gasoline, the cold seeping through broken seals, the sound of my own ragged breathing, and those eyes, those terrible, intelligent, patient eyes. The creature remained on the hood, a monument to impossibility. In the faint moonlight filtering through clouds, I could see it clearly now. Every detail burned into my memory with the permanence of a brand. Its fur was coarse and gray-black, thicker around the neck and shoulders like a mane, thinning to reveal corded muscle along the arms and chest. The body was wrong in ways that hurt to look at. Human proportions stretched and twisted, a mockery of evolution. Its torso was too deep. Ribcage expanded to house lungs that could sustain something that size, that power. The hands resting on my hood were the worst part somehow. Fingers too long, joints in places they shouldn't be, tipped with claws that curved like sickles. They were hands that could grip, could manipulate, could write words in frost on glass. Hands that proved this thing wasn't just an animal. It shifted its weight, and the truck groaned. I flinched, pressing myself back against the seat, but the creature made no move to attack. It just adjusted its position, settling more comfortably like a dog lying down on a porch. Its head remained facing me, that wolf's skull with its human intelligence watching, waiting. For what? What did it want? I thought about my options, such as they were. The truck was dead. The impact had killed the engine, and even if I could restart it, we'd hit something hard enough to deploy the airbags. The frame was probably bent. The driver's side door was pinned against something I couldn't see in the darkness. The passenger door might open, but the creature was right there, and I'd seen how fast it could move. I had my deer rifle, but it was in the back seat, and reaching for it would mean taking my eyes off the thing outside. Not that it mattered. What was I going to do, shoot it? I'd already put rounds through it at the cabin. It had flinched, bled, made sounds of pain, but it hadn't stopped. It hadn't even slowed down. Whatever this creature was, it was beyond anything my rifle could handle. The creature's head tilted slightly, and I had the terrible feeling it knew what I was thinking, that it was following my train of thought, watching me work through my hopeless calculations, savoring my despair. It reached out one hand and tapped a claw against the windshield. Not scratching this time, just tapping. A slow, deliberate rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Like a metronome counting down to something I didn't want to witness. I found my voice somewhere in the wreckage of my courage. What do you want? The tapping stopped. The creature's lips peeled back in that smile again, and it made a sound in its throat, a rumbling, grinding noise that might have been laughter if laughter could be translated through a mouth full of fangs. Want, it said, and the word was clearer this time, less garbled, like it was learning, adapting. Want, watch. Watch. It wanted to watch me to see what I would do, how I would react, how long I could last before I broke. This wasn't hunting for food, this was hunting for sport, for entertainment. I was a mouse in a trap, and the cat was in no hurry. The hours crawled past like wounded animals. I lost track of time completely. My phone had been thrown somewhere during the crash, and the dashboard clock was dark. All I had was the gradual progression of the moon across the sky, the subtle shifts in the quality of the darkness outside, and the creature that never once looked away from me. It got off the hood around what I guessed was midnight. For a moment I allowed myself to hope, but it only circled the truck, examining it from every angle. I heard it moving around the vehicle, heard its claws scraping against metal, heard it snuffling at the seams of the doors, testing, probing, learning. It found the rear window, the small sliding one in the back of the cab. I heard the glass rattle as it pushed against it, and my heart nearly stopped. That window was old, the latch worn. If it pushed hard enough, but it didn't. It just tested the resistance, cataloged the weakness, and moved on. It wasn't trying to get in. Not yet. It wanted me to know it could. Around 2 a.m, it started scratching at the passenger door. Long, slow scratches that set my teeth on edge and made my hands shake. I watched the metal flex inward with each pass, watched the paint peel away to reveal bright steel beneath. It could tear through that door in seconds if it wanted to. It was showing me how thin the barrier between us really was. I don't know when I started talking to it. The silence was worse than the scratching, and at some point, I just started filling it with words. Desperate, rambling words. I didn't do anything to you. I don't even know what you are. I just came to close up my uncle's cabin, that's all. That's all I came to do. The scratching paused. I could feel it listening. Dell never mentioned you. 50 years he owned that cabin, and he never said anything about. My voice broke. He would have told me. He would have warned me. A soft sound outside, almost like a sigh. Did you know him? Did he know about you? Is that why? I couldn't finish the thought. Dell had died of a heart attack, they said. Alone in his cabin, middle of the night. They found him in the morning sitting in his chair by the window facing the tree line. No signs of foul play, no wounds, no struggle. Just his heart giving out. But what if he'd seen something that night? What if he'd looked out that window and seen eyes in the darkness? Seen a shape moving through the trees? Seen something that no human heart could withstand? The creature's face appeared at the passenger window, and I screamed before I could stop myself. It pressed close, breath fogging the glass, those intelligent eyes studying me. Dell, it said. The name came out strange, broken, but recognizable. Dell knew. Oh God, oh God, oh God. He watched, long time, stayed quiet. Dell knew. My uncle, who taught me to hunt and fish and love these woods, had known about this thing, had coexisted with it somehow, had kept it secret. What did he give you? I asked, not knowing where the question came from, but sensing it was the right one. What was the arrangement? The creature made that grinding laugh again. Its claws came up, traced something on the glass. A shape. A deer. Crude but recognizable. Dell's feeders. The deer stand. The way he always overstocked his freezer with venison and complained about the deer eating his garden even though I never saw any damage. He'd been feeding it, keeping it satisfied, maintaining some kind of terrible peace. He's gone, I said. Dell's gone. I can't. New, the creature said. It tapped the glass, pointing at me. New. I understood then. Dell had left me more than a cabin. He'd left me a legacy, a responsibility, a curse. He'd been this thing's keeper, its provider, its pet human, and now that role had passed to me. No. The word came out stronger than I expected. No, I won't. The creature's expression changed. The smile faded, replaced by something colder, more alien. Then, watch. It disappeared from the window. For a moment there was silence. Then I heard movement on the roof, the screech of metal as it climbed on top of the cab. The whole truck shuddered under its weight. I heard it pacing up there, back and forth, the rhythm of a predator working itself up. The first blow came through the roof like a thunderbolt. Metal screamed and buckled, a dent appearing above my head, deep enough that I could see the impression of knuckles. The second blow made the dent deeper. The third split the metal, moonlight suddenly visible through the tear. It was coming through. I moved without thinking, diving for the back seat, scrambling for my rifle. My hands found the stock, pulled it forward, and I had it up and aimed at the roof, just as a clawed hand punched through the metal and grabbed, tearing a hole wide enough to reach through. I fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, the muzzle flash blinding. I heard the creature scream, that terrible sound, human and animal and something else entirely, and the hand withdrew. Blood dripped through the hole, black in the moonlight. But it didn't stop. The hole widened as it tore at the edges, peeling back the roof of the truck like the lid of a sardine can. I fired again, emptying the magazine into the darkness above me. Each shot connected. I could feel it, could hear the impacts, could see the creature jerk and snarl. But it kept coming. The roof gave way. I don't remember everything that happened next. I remember moonlight flooding the cab and a shape blotting it out. I remember teeth and claws and a weight pressing down on me that drove all the air from my lungs. I remember screaming, fighting, trying to bring the empty rifle up as a club. I remember pain, bright burning pain in my shoulder, where claws found purchase, in the smell of blood, copper, and wrong. And I remember dawn. It came without warning, a lightening of the sky to the east that I only noticed because the creature noticed it first. It was on top of me, pinning me to the seat, its face inches from mine. I could feel its breath, hot and rank. Hot, I could see myself reflected in its eyes, small, broken, dying. Then it looked up, looked east, and something changed in its expression. The hunger faded, replaced by something that might have been frustration, or maybe just disappointment. It climbed off me. Slowly, deliberately, it pulled itself out through the hole in the roof. I lay there, unable to move, unable to think, just watching as it stood on the ruined cab and turned its face toward the brightening sky. "Next time," it said. The words were clearer now, almost conversational. "Come back. Feed, or I find you." Then it was gone. One moment it was standing there, silhouetted against the dawn, and the next the trees had swallowed it without a sound. I lay in the wreckage of my uncle's truck until the sun was fully up, until I could hear birds singing in the distance, until my body finally started to believe that I wasn't going to die in the next few seconds. Then I crawled out through the shattered windshield, fell onto the frozen ground, and started walking. The highway was 4 miles away. I know because I counted every step. I don't remember much of the walk. I remember the cold, the pain in my shoulder where the creature had clawed me, the blood soaking through my jacket. I remember falling twice, maybe 3 times, and getting up again because what else could I do? I remember a logging truck finding me on the shoulder of Highway 13. The driver's face when he saw what I looked like. The rush of questions I couldn't answer. I told him I'd been in an accident. Hit a deer, rolled my truck, spent the night in the woods. He believed me. Why wouldn't he? People hit deer all the time up north, and hypothermia and blood loss could explain the state I was in. The hospital in Park Falls treated me for exposure, blood loss, and what they called animal scratches. The doctor who stitched up my shoulder asked what had attacked me, and I told him a bear. He looked skeptical. The wounds weren't quite right for a bear, he said. But he wrote it down anyway. What else was he going to write? I spent 2 days in that hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness, dreaming of eyes in the darkness and words scratched in frost. The nurses said I screamed in my sleep. I believed them. Marcus drove up from Ausau to get me. He took one look at my face and didn't ask questions, just helped me to his car and started driving. We were halfway home before I finally spoke. I'm not going back to the cabin, I said. Okay. I'm selling it. Tonight, if I can. Owen, don't. My voice cracked. Don't ask me to explain. Don't tell me I'm overreacting. Just don't. He was quiet for a long time. Then, Dell loved that place. Spent 50 years. Dell's dead. The words came out harsher than I intended. And I know why now. I know what he was doing up there, what he was keeping quiet about. He left it to me because he had no one else, because he thought I could handle it, because he was probably too much of a coward to tell me the truth. Marcus looked at me like I'd grown a second head. We'd been friends for 15 years, and he'd never heard me talk about my uncle that way. Owen, what the hell happened out there? I didn't answer. I couldn't. How do you explain something like that? How do you tell someone that everything they think they know about the world is wrong, that there are things in the woods that shouldn't exist, that those things are smart and patient and hungry, and they never forget? You don't. You just keep it locked inside and hope it doesn't eat you alive. I sold the cabin 3 weeks later, took a loss of $42,000 because I insisted on closing immediately and wouldn't let the buyers schedule an inspection. They probably thought I was crazy. They were probably right. I hope they never see what's in those woods. I hope the creature finds new prey, new arrangements, new pets. But I doubt it. It said it would find me if I didn't come back. And something tells me it meant it. I gave Diesel away 2 months after. It broke my heart, but I couldn't take care of him anymore, not the way he needed. He developed night terrors, would wake up howling at shadows, refused to go outside after dark. Whatever he'd sensed at the cabin, it had broken something in him. I found a family in Tampa. Snowbirds passing through Wisconsin on their way back south. They had kids, a big backyard, sunshine and warmth, and no forests for hundreds of miles. Diesel deserved that. He deserved better than being trapped with a man who couldn't stop listening for scratches at the window. I moved to Milwaukee 6 months later. Told Marcus I needed a change, needed to be closer to suppliers, needed more opportunities for the business. All lies, and he knew it, but he helped me pack anyway. We don't talk much anymore. He doesn't understand why I abandoned Dell's legacy, and I can't explain it to him. The distance between us grows a little wider every month. Another casualty of that night in the woods. The shop in Milwaukee is smaller than the one I had in Wausau, but it keeps me busy. I work on engines, same as always. Snowmobiles, ATVs, lawn mowers, chainsaws. The work is good for me. It keeps my hands occupied and my mind focused on problems I can actually solve. I've gotten good at not thinking about the things I can't. I don't work alone after dark anymore. Made it a rule, told my employees it was for insurance purposes. They think I'm paranoid. They're not wrong. I installed blackout curtains in my apartment. Thick ones. The kind that don't let any light through. I sleep with the bathroom light on and the bedroom door open so I can see the glow. My therapist calls it anxiety management. I call it survival. The dreams are the hardest part. Not every night, but often enough. I'm back in the truck, watching those eyes, hearing that voice. Stay, it says, and I can't move. Watch, it says, and I do, because what choice do I have? Sometimes the dream changes and I'm walking through the woods toward the cabin and I know I shouldn't be there, but my legs keep moving anyway. And in those dreams, I always see Dell sitting in his chair by the window, looking out at the darkness, keeping his silent vigil over the thing in the trees. I tried dating for a while. There was a woman named Rachel who worked at the parts store where I get my supplies. She was kind, patient, didn't push when I got quiet. We went out maybe half a dozen times before she asked why I always insisted on well-lit restaurants, why I flinched at sudden sounds, why I wouldn't go hiking with her, even though she said the trails by the lake were beautiful this time of year. I couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't explain why the thought of trees and darkness made my hands shake, why I'd rather eat at a diner on the busiest street in Milwaukee than a quiet spot in the country. She thought I was damaged, traumatized, maybe a little unstable. She wasn't wrong about any of it. We stopped seeing each other by mutual unspoken agreement, and I haven't tried again since. It's been 7 years now. I'm 41 years old, and I haven't set foot north of Highway 29 since the night I crawled out of that truck. I tell people I'm allergic to mosquitoes, that I prefer the city, that I never really liked the outdoors anyway. More lies stacked on top of each other until I can almost believe them myself. Sometimes late at night I hear tapping at the windows. My apartment is on the 4th floor facing a brick wall. There's nothing out there but air and mortar. But I hear it anyway. That slow, deliberate rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Like it's counting down to something. Like it's reminding me that it's still out there. Still waiting. Still watching. I wrote everything down like I said I would. The night after I got back from the hospital, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and a pen, and I documented every detail I could remember. The eyes in the cedar thicket, the silhouette on the logging road, the snout at the window, the hand, the tapping, the words in the frost, the night in the truck, all of it, every terrible moment, committed to paper in my shaking handwriting. The notebook is in my gun safe now, locked away with the rifle I'll never fire again. I don't know why I keep it. Maybe as proof. Maybe as a warning. Maybe just so I can look at it sometimes and remind myself that it really happened. That I'm not crazy. That the world is bigger and darker and more terrible than anyone wants to believe. I never reported what happened. Who would I tell? The DNR ranger who'd brushed me off over the phone before everything went wrong? The police who would write it off as a bear attack and probable head trauma? The newspapers so they could run a story about the crazy mechanic from Milwaukee who thinks werewolves are real? No one wants to believe in monsters. It's easier to think the world is safe, predictable, explicable. It's easier to assume that the things in the dark are just animals, just shadows, just tricks of the light. And maybe for most people that's true. Maybe most people will go their whole lives without seeing something that shatters their understanding of reality. I envy them, I really do. The creature is still out there. I know it the way I know my own heartbeat. It's in those woods near Butternut Lake, or in other woods. How many other woods across how many other states, how many other countries? How many people have seen what I saw and didn't survive to tell anyone. How many people have made arrangements like my uncle did, fed the thing in the darkness to keep it satisfied, kept its secret because they were too afraid or too complicit or too broken to do anything else? I think about the word it scratched into my windshield sometimes. Mine. Not a threat, I realize now. A statement of fact. I was its prey, its entertainment, its pet project. And even though I escaped, even though I'm 300 miles away in a city full of lights and noise and people, some part of me will always belong to it because it made me a promise. That night in the truck, come back, feed, or I find you. I don't know if it can travel that far. I don't know if the sunrise that saved me was a limitation or just an inconvenience. I don't know if it remembers me, thinks about me, hunts for me in its dreams, the way I flee from it in mine. But I know I'll never stop looking over my shoulder. I know I'll never stop listening for the sounds that don't belong, the scratching, the tapping, the silence where there should be noise. I know I'll never trust the darkness again, never feel safe in places without walls and locks and lights. That's what it took from me in the end. Not my life. It could have had that any time it wanted. It took my peace, my sense of safety, my ability to believe that the world makes sense. And maybe that was the point all along. I keep the bathroom light on when I sleep now, every night without fail. Some people think it's childish, a fear of the dark that I should have outgrown decades ago. But they don't understand. The light isn't to keep the monsters away. It's so I can see them coming. 3 nights ago, I woke to the sound of tapping at my window. 4th floor, brick wall, nothing out there but city air. I told myself it was a bird, a branch, a trick of the wind. I told myself all the things I've been telling myself for 7 years. But when I got up to check, when I pressed my face against the glass and looked out at the empty night, I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. On the window, scratched into the frost that had formed on the outside of the glass, was a single word: soon. I haven't slept since. I don't know if I'll ever sleep again. Because somewhere out there in the darkness beyond the city lights, something is waiting. Something that remembers me, something that made a promise. And I have a terrible feeling it intends to keep it.